Hello everyone and welcome to Introduction to Stress and Trauma Part 3. Today we are going to be talking about supporting and lending skills to children. My name is Timothy Smith. Very happy to be sharing this information with you today and look forward to celebrating and learning and growing together. If you have not watched Part 1 and Part 2 of this training series, I strongly encourage you to watch those first two trainings first before you watch Part 3. It's going to make a lot more sense to you since all three of the trainings build on top of each other. Let's go ahead and get started. Like the other two trainings, just want to give a little warning that some of the information in this particular topic, understanding extreme amounts of stress and trauma, might get a little personal for some people. We sometimes go down our own personal rabbit holes when dealing with stress and trauma, especially unresolved trauma. And that's okay. If you do kind of start reflecting on your past, reflecting on your childhood, that's healthy because we have to focus on the adult first, child second, especially with this particular topic of conversation. So this video might be helpful not only for the children that are in your classroom, but it might be helpful for you personally as well. Now, with this training and any of the trainings that I offer, and you can find more information about the trainings that I offer on timthetrainer.com. The website is right there at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions or if you need more information related to this training topic beyond the scope of the training material, you can always message me directly from our website, timthetrainer.com, in the upper right-hand corner. You can call my training hotline or you can email any particular questions that you have, whether it's about something going on in your classroom, something personally with you. We're always here to help you, to support you, and to lend those skills so that we can all experience that success. In part 2 of understanding stress and trauma, we talked about the autonomic nervous system, that internal clacker that helps keep us regulated. When we're under aroused, we go into our parasympathetic activation. When we're over aroused, we go into our sympathetic activation. The goal is to get to that optimal state where we're relaxed, where we're alert, all right? And again, all of part 2 of this training series is about the autonomic nervous system and what happens whenever a child is under aroused, what happens when the child is over aroused. So we're gonna kind of pick up where we left off in part 2 and kind of move forward with supporting and lending children skills during these difficult times. I wanted to throw this information out here to you so that you could really understand how important it is to understand the arousal system, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic system, and how it relates to early childhood education. 80% of all diseases are caused by an imbalance in the autonomic nervous system. In part 2, we talked about the vagal nerve that goes from your brain all the way down your body, and it goes into every organ. When you've got a child that is either overstimulated or understimulated, over-aroused or under-aroused, that feeds into every part of your body, every organ of your body, and it causes an imbalance. So when you're working with children with high amounts of stress, when you're working with children with trauma, not only is it about classroom management and lending the appropriate skills to the children, you're having a lifelong impact on the health of that child. We've got to get that balanced right there. And even when we're working with adults that have had that imbalance and that internal clacker, We see a lot of illnesses, a lot of diseases, a lot of mental illnesses, these type of things, but it's not too late. And that's the beautiful thing. We can still help balance that arousal system and kind of get people back on the right track. Now, I just wanted to really quickly, before we get into supporting and lending skills to children, really taking this look at stress versus trauma, all right? And we talked about this in the first two webinars, having that mild amount of stress, having that moderate amount of stress, and then eventually you get to the overwhelming point where the stress becomes the trauma, all right? And when that trigger happens is when we go into parasympathetic activation. So first off, we look at, that point where we hit an overwhelmed point and the perception comes, we're not going to make it, all right? And I bet all of us have had life experiences where you've had so much stress going on that you're like, we're not going to make it through this. You lose hope, you lose optimism, and think of it of a glass. You've all heard the phrase about the glass being half full, the glass being half empty. Well, at this point, the glass is completely full and cannot take any more. For young children, this is when they melt down. And there's a big difference between a tantrum when a child is trying to manipulate a situation versus a meltdown. And that meltdown is when their cup is full and they just can't take anymore. Mentally, emotionally, physically, they're like wiped out right here. Okay, so we've got to be aware of that, because how you support a child with a tantrum is very different than how you support a child with a meltdown. When a child is having a meltdown, they need comfort, they need nurturing, they need to know that you're there for them, they need to know that they're safe, they need a lot of deep breaths, they don't need a lot of words, all right? Now, tantrum is when they're trying to manipulate a situation. All right, you're going to recognize that they have been triggered. You're going to help them calm. You're going to recognize the feeling. All right, and then the child is going to choose to solve the problem, and then you support the child solving the problem. So very different techniques right there. When you do have that massive amount of stress, and whenever it shifts over to trauma, this triggers a massive parasympathetic response that comes online emitting opioids and endorphins that basically are preparing our bodies to shut down and die in a less painful way. And that's what happens right here, whether it's a primitive instinct with animals or whether it's with humans. Our body gets to a point where it says, we're not going to survive this, and it starts shutting down, okay? So whenever you notice a child in your classroom that starts showing parasympathetic responses, okay, that's a big indicator right there that we need to intervene. And a lot of times, in high stress situations, when it's a sympathetic activation, that child gets a lot of attention because they're flipping tables and they're throwing chairs and they're ripping down bulletin boards. But when they start to withdraw, we're like, okay, they're not hurting anyone, they're not yelling, they're not screaming, all right? And we tend to let them go unnoticed. Y'all, we need to really pay attention to this, all right? That child needs your help and your support just as much as that table flipper, just as much as the one throwing the chair. So we've got this little chart right here, and you've got your environment, whether it's the classroom environment, the home environment, all right? And where is that child at with their autonomic nervous system, okay? Now, when the child is safe and the autonomic nervous system is regulated, this is when they can have social engagement. This is when they can solve problems. This is when they can meet the needs of others. When there is a perceived threat of danger from the child's version of reality, they're going to mobilize, they're going to fight, they're going to flee, All right, but that is a sign that there is a perceived threat of danger from the child's version of reality. Now, your job as the teacher or as the adult is to be able to see the world from the child's version of reality and be able to pinpoint what is that perceived threat of danger. Now, the next one you see here is life-threatening. At what point does the brain say, we're not going to make it through this, okay? We've got to start shutting down. And that life-threatening response is when they immobilize, they start shutting down, they start withdrawing, okay? And you're going to kind of see these in stages right there. Our goal in supporting and lending skills to children is to get them back up to the higher centers of their brain where they feel safe, they can have that social engagement, they can solve problems, they can meet the needs of others. Now you take this same slide right here and you look at it a little bit differently. So once again, we've got the environment, whether it's the home or the classroom. Okay, you look at the regulation or lack of regulation of the autonomic nervous system. When the child feels safe, they have social engagement. When the child is stressed, all right, mobilization, fight, or flight. When there's trauma, that's when they're starting to shut down, immobilize, withdraw. And so you can kind of see how the two relate right here. Okay. I've actually got a brand new training on biting that will be out later this month. Check out my website, timthetrainer.com. Follow me on social media, Facebook or Instagram, and you can get information on this training that's going to be live, and it'll be on my website afterwards. But we've been talking a lot about biting here lately. And the goal with biting is to find the stress reduction strategy that is needed for that particular child. Stressed toddlers bite, and that's what we have to recognize right here. Okay, so this topic has been coming up a lot here lately, so I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, add that in there. Now, when we talk about young children with stress and trauma, all right, the younger the child is, the more vulnerable they are to trauma. I want to say that again. The younger the child, the more vulnerable they are to trauma. The reason for this is they can't get away from it. They can't mobilize, all right? They can fight, but the adult is much bigger than them, okay? They can't flee, right? The child has nowhere to go. And that's why we have to really pay attention to this in early education, whether it's your infant, toddler, 2-year-old classrooms, even your 3s and pre-K, at home, whatever it might be. But, the child is kind of no match for the adult. So they are much more vulnerable to trauma. And a lot of times that trauma is unintentional, okay? The adult is not intending to cause that high amount of stress or trauma, but it happens, okay, unintentionally. It could also happen intentionally. Now, we talk a lot about the social and emotional blueprint for learning. The social and emotional blueprint for development is created from the 3rd trimester of pregnancy until the age of 2. So when we talk about stress and trauma, y'all, we're talking about the 3rd trimester of pregnancy too. Whenever you're working with children in the classroom and you're having conversations with the family about, has there been a single event or a series of events that could have impacted this child, don't just look at, events that could have happened since the child was born, but you got to go back even further, okay? During that 3rd trimester of pregnancy, frightened or frightening caregiving that could have happened pre-birth, neglect, separation, or abandon. So the mother was neglected, separated, or abandoned during pregnancy. witness to domestic violence. The mother was threatened during that stage of pregnancy, all right, by another adult, accident, medical crisis, surgeries, or a child that is born to mentally ill parents. Okay, and again, all of this could be happening before the child is even born. Then we look at the threshold for trauma after the child is born. And look at it, it's right here. Frightened or frightening caregiving, neglect, separation, abandonment, witness to domestic violence at that very, very young age. Those threatening words, just do it, stop crying, you know. And you may not necessarily say, do you want me to kill you? But very similar words that are perceived in that manner. Accidents, medical crisis, surgery. You know, sometimes when I'm working with families, they say, oh, well, the child was so young when they had this illness, when they had this accident, when they had this surgery. They were so young, they don't remember it. Well, the brain may not remember it, but the body does. The body always remembers, okay? And once again, born to mentally ill parents. So we're going to kind of break down the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems one more time before we get into lending and supporting children with stress and trauma. Okay. Now, the sympathetic activation, and this is that child that is jacked up. Their arousal system is really, really sped up. You've got the rage, terror, anger, panic, unable to sleep. These are all signs or indicators that the child is over aroused. The feeling that they've got in their body, the tight muscles, the fidgeting, the hypervigilant. And you know, I always, when working with teachers, know your triggers and write down what behaviors push your buttons, whether it's in the classroom, at home, wherever it may be. And you're going to keep this to yourself. It's not something you're going to share with everybody. But I also want you to write down, what does your body feel like when you get triggered? You know, I know for me, the top of my head starts sweating. It gets really hot and starts sweating. My voice starts to crackle. My heart feels like it's going to beat out of my chest. You know, my hands get a little shaky. These are all, you know, indicators, and my body is telling me you are triggered. All right, you are over aroused, and we've got to regulate that. Our body is constantly sending us these messages. Okay, but I want y'all to think about that because it's different for every single adult. You know, how your body signals that you're over aroused. And once you're able to pinpoint that for yourself, it's the same for the children, okay? And they have those same feelings, you know, whether it's the sweaty or hot head, the shaking hands, their heart beating out of their chest. I've had people tell me that they kind of start drooling a little bit, like, you know, all of these different things. But in order for us to support and lend skills to the children, we have to help them recognize when they're over aroused, okay? But you got to do it for yourself first. Then we go into the parasympathetic symptoms when they're under aroused, all right? So when that internal clacker slows down, they can be sleepy, lethargic, nauseous. They can seem confused. You might have some children that have collapsed posture. They might say that they're cold. And sometimes they just go, I don't care, whatever, you know, I don't care. And you kind of get that response out of them right there. This is our indicator that we, once again, need to be there for them. We need to comfort them. We need to support them. All right? And we got to kind of get that clacker going again. Okay, we can do some games with eye contact, some joint attention right there. lots of face-to-face, lots of noticing, and kind of bring that back up. All right, but these are indicators that you got to really pay close attention to. We've talked about this in a couple of the other webinars as well, but it's really important for you to have these visuals in your head. And when you are supporting and lending skills to children with stress and trauma, it's almost like you need to kind of visualize each individual child and what their fulcrum looks like right here. All right. When you've got the child, how many positive outcomes has that child had? How many negative outcomes has that child had? Now, the thing about this imaginary fulcrum right here, you can't take outcomes off. All right? You can't remove these. You cannot delete them. You can't throw them in the trash. But we can add to them. All right? And that's the goal with supporting and lending skills to children with stress and trauma, is that we've got to add more positive outcomes to their internal fulcrum. Okay? Now, we also have outside forces that are working against us. Okay? So as you're working with children in your classroom, there could be stress at home, could be stress in the classroom as well. There could be violence at home, poverty, mental illness, not just that child, but important people in that child's life. And these all could be adding negative outcomes to their fulcrum. If you know that you're working with a child that has some of these outside forces that are also adding to those negative outcomes, then we've got to continue to add more positive outcomes. All right? So we have to balance it out. And that's what supporting and lending skills is all about. Now, there are some positive outside forces that can also move the fulcrum. Supporting relationships. That's where we come in the classroom, is we want to make sure that we're providing a lot of healthy, secure, supportive relationships to that child's life. And not just in the classroom, but we can be lending these skills and modeling these skills to the adults that is in that child's life, whether it's mom, dad, guardian, whoever it might be. All right? So we have that responsibility to lend skills not just to the child, but to the entire family. Remembering that mom, dad, guardian are doing the best they can with the skills they've got. All right? Never forget that right there. We want the child to have a felt sense of safety from the child's point of view. We're going to create that in the classroom, but once again, we can also support the development of a felt sense of safety at home with the modeling, with the lending of skills to the families, being able to recognize those perceived threats of danger from the child's point of view, getting the parents to see things differently. Financial security obviously is going to be an outside force. Not much we can do about that. Good health. Once again, we're going to provide a healthy and nurturing environment at our program and lend those skills at home. So once again, we can balance out that fulcrum. Much of the information that we are covering today does come from the work of Dr. Becky Bailey and Conscious Discipline. So we appreciate Dr. Bailey for all of her research, all of her guidance, all of her mentoring. Thank you to Conscious Discipline for all of the resources that you provide to us in the early education industry. But this is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Becky Bailey right here. Discipline is not something that you do to children. It's something that we develop within them. Supporting children with stress and trauma, okay, is about developing that internal discipline so that they will have the resiliency to be able to push through these difficult times in their life. And when we've got them in early education settings, we can practice the skills that they can use for a lifetime. And it starts with creating safe and healthy relationships. Connections, connections, connections. The dilemma right here is that trauma happens often in relationships, and it's often through relationships that trauma is healed. Now, do you see where the dilemma is? Because if the person that was supposed to keep the child safe is the one that hurt them, then the child has lost a lot of trust. But you can't build a new relationship until that trust has been rebuilt. Okay? So it takes a lot of work. It doesn't happen instantly. This is not something you can Amazon Prime and have here tomorrow. Okay? It takes a lot of work. And it starts with supportive adults. All right? Adults that are connecting, that are communicating, that are compassionate, that practice empathy, that are just simply present with the child. We make the eye contact, we have physical touch, we are present and focused on the child, we have that joint attention, okay? And then play. Play uses the same circuits in the brain as trauma. Okay, so play is the pathway out of trauma. It's the pathway back from trauma. So let's go over some suggestions and tips that you can practice to help support children with stress and trauma. First off, you got to know your triggers. And I mentioned this earlier in the webinar. Okay, know your triggers, write down your triggers. What are things that the children say or do in your classroom that you know pushes your button? This is your opportunity to self-regulate. But what is really important about this is not only is it your opportunity to self-regulate, it's your opportunity to model. Okay, it's your opportunity to model self-regulation to the children. I am a big believer that children need to witness you getting triggered so that they can see you calm. They need to know that it's possible to get triggered and then calm afterwards. I think this is important for you. It's important for them. Upload and download calm. Be very conscious of the energy that you're bringing into the room. Be very conscious of the energy that you're bringing into that situation. Are you coming in like a tiger trying to eat the antelope? Or are you coming into the situation calm and peacefully? Be very, very aware of your intentions. All right? When you enter a scenario, children can pick up on your intentions. They can pick up on your willingness to adapt and support. Don't ever think this is not possible, because it is so true. We want to shift from judging to noticing. All right, we're gonna talk about noticing here in just a little bit. But judgment comes from the brainstem. Judgment is a survival skill. Noticing comes from the higher centers of the brain. When you judge someone, you give off that negative energy. When you notice someone, okay, you're downloading calm. Find something that you have in common with that child. We've got to build that relationship first. You have to reach them before you can teach them. So what is it that you have in common with that child? All right? And then stick to that. You're going to come up with rituals. You're going to come up with greetings. You're going to come up with farewell rituals whenever the child leaves at the end of the day. All based on something that you have in common with them. Keep those connections ongoing. And that kind of leads to number 5 right here, seeking a connection. And just because you make the connection one day does not mean you're going to have the connection tomorrow. All right? Connections are ongoing. And depending on the state of the child, depending on whether the child is, over aroused or under aroused, that connection is going to look and feel different. And the way you connect to that child is going to be different. So there's no cookie cutter approach to this. And you're going to have to find kind of like a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of ways that you connect with the child based on that particular state. Let's kind of go back to, knowing that you are triggered. Now remember, anytime you get triggered, you're always the last person to know. Everyone around you is going to be aware of your triggers except for you, all right? And it's no different for the children that you're working with. I have people that make comments to me like, oh, I have this little boy in my classroom and he'll just walk across the room and punch someone in the face for no reason, and have a smile on his face whenever he does it. There's always a reason. There's always a trigger, okay? But remember, when you get triggered, you're always the last person to know. So that child is not even aware of their trigger yet, okay? And that's what we got to focus on right there. Brain's biological imperative is to survive. Okay, that's what it's doing. Our brain is constantly seeking out danger. Our brain is constantly asking, what do I have to do to survive? It automatically reacts to and remembers any cue indicating the possibility of danger in our life. Okay, now I want y'all to look at that again. It automatically reacts to and remembers any cue indicating the possibility of danger. So there could have been a possibility of danger when that child was 2 years old that the brain remembers. And now the child is 4 or 5. And something could happen in that classroom that triggers that survival state. All right? So once again, this is where we have to pay really close attention, do a lot of anecdotal records, a lot of note taking, so that we can help pinpoint that. It doesn't make anything right or wrong. It just is what it is. That's how the brain is wired. All right? The brain is biased to respond to any danger it has known before. Okay? So it's kind of like that fulcrum I was talking about. You can't delete that. You can't take it off. But we got to add more positive stuff to it. All right, when we do get triggered, we experience sudden and overwhelming feelings, sensations that say, I'm in danger right now, okay? And that's what we talked about earlier. Signs that you are triggered, sudden, intense, hard to shift, voice tone, facial tightness, body posture, tightness in the pit of your stomach, throat, muscles, shallow breathing, holding your breath. That's something else that I do, I know. Obsessive thinking, ruminating. You're starting to create all of these false stories in your head. All right. Jumping to conclusions or worst case scenario. All of these things come up. Label all triggers as body memories. Get curious. All right. Really focus on that. Now, when you do get triggered, you've got to practice being a star. This is something that we practice in conscious discipline. All right, smile, take a deep breath, and relax. Now, you can modify this to say stop, take a deep breath, and relax. And remember, not only are you regulating yourself, but you're modeling being a star to the children. Model this to the children. And always say to yourself, I am safe. Keep breathing. I can handle this. Okay, smile, take a deep breath, and relax. I am safe. Keep breathing. I can help this child with their problem. Notice that child instead of judging that child. Children have to be seen different before they can act different. It is very important that we see children through loving eyes. We see children as opportunities. Okay? If I have a person that comes up to me and they say, well, I've got this kid in my classroom, we've tried everything and nothing works. Well, the problem here is not with the child, it's with the adult. Because if that's the way you continue to look at that child, then you're right. Nothing is going to work. We have to notice that child instead of judging them. Here's another quote from Dr. Becky Bailey, author and founder of Conscious Discipline. The difference between being seen, noticed, and being judged is the difference between conflict and peace within ourselves, each other, and the world. Wow, how awesome is that right there, especially right now. So when we notice children, okay, noticing children helps promote eye contact so that we can download. Oh, your face is going like this, and you've got tears coming down your face. All right? Now, whenever you notice and you describe, the child's going to turn and look at you, and the moment you get that eye contact, you download that calm. Noticing will help you get that eye contact. It helps provide consciousness to unconscious procedural memory systems. All right? You know how we talked about when the brain perceives danger, it remembers that response, right? The more we are able to notice and describe and acknowledge, okay, it's going to really help provide that consciousness. And a lot of this, when we talk about supporting children with stress and trauma, it's about activating that consciousness. And that's so important right here. It adds language to nonverbal actions which integrate the left and right hemisphere of the brain. Okay? And remember, we're working with early education students. Their language is very limited. When we talk about children with high amounts of stress and trauma, their vocabulary is very limited. So the more vocabulary that we can describe that is related to self-regulation and consciousness is going to help that child in the future. Okay, we want to direct our positive neuroplasticity to rewire the brain by focusing attention. Neuroplasticity is the rearrangement of the cells in the brain. Now remember, connections on the outside build connections on the inside. So when we're talking about neuroplasticity, the connections that we build with the children on the outside are just as important or more important is what we're doing on the inside of the brain. But we've got to rewire that brain to focus the attention on safety. Otherwise, with stress and trauma, their brain is completely focused on danger and survival. We got to rewire that to focus on safety. We want to set the stage for self-regulation because self-regulation always provides two. Okay? Now, for an adult, when we say self-regulation, it always requires two. It's the internal speech, okay, and being able to recognize and notice your internal speech. Your internal speech helps co-regulate your outside behaviors. But you've got to regulate the internal speech first before you can co-regulate your outside behaviors. Now, it's the same thing for children. Okay, children do not have mature inner speech. They don't have the voice inside of our head that's constantly talking to us and coaching us, okay, those type of things. But it still takes two to self-regulate. So that's where with young children under the age of 7, it's me and you. It's the adult co-regulating the child, okay? Now, your outside voice becomes the child's inside voice. Let me say that again because it's so important. Your outside voice becomes the child's inside voice. You get to wire and program that child's inner speech. So when we look at this right here, when an adult says to a child, "You look pretty today," the child hears, "I look pretty today." When an adult says, "You are so clumsy," the child hears, "I am so clumsy." Now, that's all judgment. Let's practice some noticing right here. You turned off the whiteboard so that we could move on to our next scheduled event. The child hears, "I am a helpful person." Do you notice the difference? I noticed that you sat down and raised your hand just like this. The child hears, "You noticed me when I do what you want." Now, when we talk about noticing and judging, it's not just the words that are coming out of your mouth. I also want you to pay really close attention to non-verbal communication. We can say the right words, but our body sends a different message. So look at this lady right here on the screen, okay? She's saying, "I like the way you're sitting." But is her body language saying the same thing that her voice is saying? And so the child is going to interpret that, "You like me when I do what you say." Now, did you notice the difference right there? "I think you are pretty." Child hears, "You think I'm pretty." "I think you're clumsy." Child hears, "You think I'm clumsy." And it's the "I think" that makes it judgment, all right? Instead of "you seem" or "you are." Okay, so be really conscious of those words. Pay very close attention to the body language that you're sending off. So in this little recap right here, okay, when supporting children with stress and trauma, know your triggers, upload and download calm, shift from judging to noticing, find something that you have in common with that particular child. Connection is going to wire the brain for impulse control and willingness. And that's what we want with these kids. Impulse control and willingness. So healthy, secure connections. And it all starts with the eye contact, the physical touch, the presence, and the play. So that's the one thing we just gonna practice. All right, the eye contact, the physical touch, the presence, and the play. That face-to-face connection, Joy Juice, infant, toddler, 2-year-old teacher, 60% of your day should be face-to-face with a child. All right, face-to-face joint attention with your children is as effective as a mild dose of Ritalin. That's how powerful this is. And y'all, it's not just young children. This is with adults too. Okay? And we want to be able to take back your power. All right? I was an old school traditional pre-K teacher back in the day, many, many years ago. And I would use these type of words, look how you made her feel. Look how you're making me feel, right? Do you want me to be angry? Do you want Mr. Tim to be sad? Right? I'm giving my power away. You've got to take back your power and hold on to that power. And we do that through noticing. All right? So instead of saying, look how you made her feel, do you see her face? Her face is saying, move over. How about this one? Don't make me have to stop this car. I'm going to stop the car until the seat belts are fastened and everyone is safe. So again, you notice the difference right here. Take back that power. Whomever you believe to be in charge of your feelings, you have placed in charge of you. All right? And y'all, this is not just in the classroom working with the children. This is like good advice in your personal life too. Whomever you believe to be in charge of your feelings, you have placed in charge of you. All right? If you allow people to trigger you, if you allow people to make you angry, if you allow people to make you sad, they are in charge of you. So it's about resetting that fulcrum right here. Our goal is to get those positive outcomes to outweigh the negative outcomes. Okay? That's where all of this is leading towards right here. When we talk about obedience and compliance, you know, we want to we look at compliance and control, judgment and separation and fear. This is how a lot of us were brought up. This is how a lot of us were raised, right? I'm going to control you. You're going to be in compliance. Otherwise, I'm going to judge you or I'm going to separate you. Okay? And the people that brought us up used a lot of fear to manipulate situations. What we've got to focus on to help support children with stress and trauma is, instead of compliance and control, we want to focus on problem solving. Instead of judgment and separation, instead of the us and the them, we want to create the we. It's the connection. Instead of instilling fear, we want to create that felt sense of safety. So you've got to be able to create that new job description that focuses on intention. Focus on the expectation, not the behavior. All right? If you're only focusing on the behavior, nothing's going to change. We have to focus on the intention. So the old way of doing this, how can I coerce you? How can I manipulate you? And our transformational approach here, how can I help you be successful? Okay? And it's not just the children that we're working with. It's the adults that we work with as well. Okay? So whether you're a director, you're an administrator, you're a lead teacher, whatever it may be, how can I manipulate you? Versus how can I help you be successful? The way we do this, focus on what you want. All right? We want a clean and organized classroom. We want children to be cooperative and have empathy towards each other. Don't focus on what you don't want. All right? Look how messy this room is. Stop fighting on the playground. Shift it to the intention. Pivot to the positive. All right? And that's how we can support these children. All right, so that is the end of our webinar right here on part 3, supporting and lending skills to children, understanding stress and trauma. Please go back and watch part 1 and part 2 if you feel that would be helpful. Please share this video with anyone that you feel would benefit from this material. And once again, if you have any questions, any comments about anything that we discussed, you can message me directly from my website, timthetrainer.com. You can email, you can call, and we will respond in a timely manner. Thank you so much. Be sure to follow me on social media, Tim the Trainer. Remember, my name is spelled with a Y. We have a lot of opportunities for live training, both in person and on webinars. Also, we got a lot of additional resources available on our website. I'm traveling all over the country these days, so might catch you in your city sometime soon. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate your time.